The spires of Veldrian Prime cut into a lavender sky like the ribs of a sleeping leviathan. Inside the tallest spire, 12 delegations arranged themselves around a ring of cold light. Their languages disagreed on everything except one word: frontier. Admiral Therx of the Glassborn clicked a claw against his chin ridge and called up a holomap. Blue spirals blossomed, and a small yellow star pulsed like a heartbeat. "The backwater the humans call Sol," he said. "They are multiplying. 7 colonies now. They breed fast and build faster. If they are permitted to reach the Orion lanes, we will have to seed resources for 1,000 years. A silken voice replied from a body of vapor. "Admiral, they are 8 centuries behind Concord Standard," whispered the Mist Lattice envoy. "Projectile throwers, chemical fire." Laughter rippled, the comfortable laughter of empires that have forgotten caution. Therx did not laugh. He magnified a set of faint red signatures around the human worlds. "Look at their distribution. Not proud, not loud. Layered, defensive. Our scouts died too cleanly for primitives." Across 40 light-years under 2 miles of granite somewhere in Colorado, Dr. Naomi Park stared at the opposite side of the same holomap. The Deep Watch Array had blinked at her like a sleepless eye all night. It had finally decided what it was seeing. She rubbed her hands to erase the tremor before opening a secure line. "Directorate, this is Park. Massing at Grid 77 Alpha. 2,000 plus hulls minimum. One object is small moon class." The words tasted like metal. By dusk in Geneva, heads of state from every block sat around a table that had survived 2 world wars and a dozen trade ones. General Archero Reyes took the podium with the stillness of a man who knew what fear did to a room. "If we fight by the book," he said, "we lose the book. Less than 2% probability of holding orbit." A murmur like surf. "Then, that's why the book changed 43 years ago." He gestured, and the wall fell away into a gallery of ships no one outside a handful of labs had ever seen. Hulls whose skin swallowed starlight. Spines of field projectors that seemed to bend the room. Naomi felt the old, dissonant pride touch her throat. She had spent 2 decades whispering to equations so that these things could exist. Reyes said the name at last. "Project Janus. If you need a myth, think of the god with 2 faces, peace and preparation. We built for both." They had started when Voyager's grandchildren picked up whispers that were not from nature. The response had not been panic, it had been budgeting. Physicists were bribed with telescope time, engineers with impossible problems. Every breakthrough went 2 places: the journals and the basement. The unassuming cubes on Mars that everyone called weather stations. Those were Faraday bastions. The mines in the belt that yielded almost nothing. Those were camouflage for kinetic foundries. The lunar radio facility that complained about budget every fiscal year. It smiled for cameras and hid a quantum backbone. "Numbers," said the President of the Americas. 800 Janus-compliant vessels online, Reyes answered. "Manufacturing at Delphi Yard continues at wartime tempo, but numbers aren't advantage. Misperception is." He let that hang, a lesson from every ambush ever sprung. "They think we are a species of flags and fuel tanks. We are a species of plans." Naomi took the room through slides the way a surgeon explains a risk before a necessary incision. She showed them the non-Newtonian shear hulls that could bias momentum out of phase for microseconds. She showed them the gravity lace emitters. No beams, no flash, only the sudden compliance of matter to a new geometry. She did not show them the cost curves or the failures. Tragedies were filed under classified for morale. "What about law?" asked the Chancellor of Europa. "What do we allow ourselves to do?" Naomi thought of her father's service flag and the box of letters from a war that had promised to end all wars. She thought of Thucydides, whose trap was not prophecy but warning. "We choose proportionality," she said. "We strike engines before bridges, bridges before homes. We remember Lincoln, with malice toward none, with charity for all and the clause he left unsaid while holding the line." The room exhaled. Decision, when it finally arrives, is a relief. Votes clicked. Keys turned. Somewhere in the Pacific, a dry dock unscrolled like a fern, revealing the knife-edge silhouette of a ship that did not officially exist. In Florida, kids watched a rocket launch and argued about baseball while a second stage hit a third and went dark over the Gulf. On a replenishment tug near Neptune, a cook stirred lentils while the bulkheads around him hummed to life and relabeled themselves cruiser. In the lavender chamber of Veldrian Prime, the Concorde chose contempt. "Demonstration first," Xerxes ordered. "Crush the sentry stations, burn their fuel depots, then broadcast terms. They will be better slaves if they see our horizon." He dismissed the dissenting murmurs with a flick of a talon. Pride was a habit now, not a thought. On Naomi's screen, the invasion's bow wave crossed an invisible line in the dark. "They're inside the picket," she told Reyes. He nodded once and put his hand on the table, an old Marine's habit, as if steadying a ship. "Then we meet them where they expect emptiness," he said, "and we give them the other face of Janus." Admiral Xerxes had seen 100 battle spaces, but Sol unsettled him. A plain star, yes, with 8 respectable planets, but the debris felt curated, fields of rock in oddly harmonic distributions. Station pings that looked like weather telemetry and smelled like teeth. He raised his crest. "Vanguard forward, main line hold." 2,400 signatures rippled. "Nothing, no challenge," his comms chief hissed. "Admiral returns appearing close." On the panoramic, empty vacuum kinked and unfurled ships where none had been, not jumps, not cloaks, as if the light had been persuaded to forget them until now. The newcomers were slim, knife-backed forms with no ports or fins, only seams where armor met deliberately wrong angles. On Youth's Republic, Captain Isaac Monroe checked the time stamp. The Janus net had predicted the Concorde's arrival within 10 minutes. It arrived inside one. He inhabited worry the way a diver inhabits water. "Gravlace to full," he said. "Target their flag cluster. No warning salvos." There was no flash. A patch of space near a glass-borne dreadnought sagged and then snapped, as if an invisible hand had wrung it. The dreadnought's ribs compacted and then sprang outward into a spray of fragments. The second in line tried to yaw away and slid along a curve that had not existed a breath before. It came apart neatly, as if cut by a patient god. Xerxes did not shout. "Return fire," he said through stone. Cerulean plasma gripped the darkness. Reality skew missiles folded and unfolded toward human hulls. On Republic's bridge, the incoming looked like a planetarium's laser show, beautiful and irrelevant. The ship's skin shimmered. Monroe saw Park's equation, watching energy miss a phase by a tick. Rivers of light bent like reeds around a rock. "Pattern Wolf," he ordered. The pack broke in 3s and 5s. They did not trade broadsides, they trespassed. Youth's Bennington slid through a cruiser as fog through lattice, rematerialized beyond, and bit the engine throat at arm's length. Youth's Sutter used its drive as a hammer. warping a square of spacetime behind an enemy frigate until the hull fluted and crumpled. A squadron of Concorde strikers swarmed a lone corvette. They met a flower of micro-wells that gathered them into a fist and closed. Above Colorado, Naomi watched with an attention so absolute it felt like prayer. Every maneuver looked effortless. She knew the cost: bone-white nights, workers who kept secrets, algorithms trained on ugly histories to recognize the curve of a mistake. "Losses?" she asked. "None," replied the ops officer. Yet, Xerxes had fought prey before. Prey panicked. This hunted. "How do they coordinate?" he demanded, the machine intelligence at his right word through spectra. "No lag," it said. "No discernible carrier, as if their ships think with a divided brain." Admiration stung worse than fear. On Republic, Monroe said, "Hold discipline. The last 20% is where sloppiness writes epitaphs." They had briefed it 100 times, fight like you trust the plan. They had also briefed something Reyes had insisted on: restraint scored into doctrine. Engines and weapons first. Bridge compartments last. A species is not its government. After 27 minutes, the Concorde's vanguard looked like a reef after a storm, jagged and dying. "Phase 1 complete," Naomi reported. Reyes nodded. "Fall back on the lattice," he told Fleet. "Make them think we breathe hard there." He toggled a sidebend to the belt. "Wake them," he said, and the man who answered from Ceres laughed like someone who had been waiting his whole life. Xerxes pulled survivors back toward a brown-striped giant threaded with moons. Space around Jupiter bulged with interference, storms, industrial clutter, ancient probes. He let his crews breathe and did the arithmetic he trusted more than omens. They had numbers, reserves, history. The invaders always had a trick. Tricks end. He drew breath to command the regroup when the belt moved. What he had charted as a million uninteresting rocks found purpose. Velocities changed like a choir finding its key. The sensors screamed about thousands of mass points leaning into new predatory curves. "Kinetic swarm," someone blurted. "Impossible," someone else answered. Both were right. A simple rock at a wicked speed can humble a god. A guided rock wrapped in wells that tug you where you don't wish to go can humble a fleet. On Republic, Monroe muttered the line taped in his locker. "In war, the moral is to the physical as 3-1. All ships," he said, "keep clear of the channels. Let the stones preach." The first wave arrived not like a barrage but like choreography. Thousands of discrete lessons in Newton rendered by 20 years of dirty geology and clean math. Xerxes ordered dispersal and watched his formations smear across the plot. It did not save them. Gravity wells braided around targets, pulling a destroyer a hand's breadth off course, enough to bring an unremarkable rock into fatal alignment. When the strikes hit, a new sun was born and died in the same breath. On the Concorde net, voices overlapped, so many languages boiled down to one noun none of them wanted to say: trap. A human voice rode a tight beam into Xerxes' skull. Calm American vowels. "Admiral of the Concorde forces, this is General Reyes of Earth Defense. You entered our frontier of your own will. You have seen a fraction of what we prepared. You may withdraw. We will guide you out. Or you may persist, and see the rest." Xerxes tasted pride and ash. "Open channel," he said. "General Reyes, you misunderstand. You face the Concorde of 12. You will bend. It is mercy that we do not burn your cradle." Reyes's answer came without heat. "Mercy and restraint aren't the same, Admiral. We practice both, but we don't confuse them." Somewhere beyond Jupiter, the lattice finished waking. The lattice was older than the fleet. It began as research nodes and refueling depots. It grew teeth in the quiet years when everyone pretended not to notice. In public, it was infrastructure. In doctrine, it was Sable Net, a geometry of fields that made faster-than-light drives sulk and sublight engines obedient to human hands. Naomi once said, "Convince a river to remember its old banks, that's what we ask space to do." Net integrity, Ray's asked. 89% in climbing, said Ops. Across the plot, faint filaments brightened, connecting stations that had just stopped pretending to be weather labs. Out near Neptune, a ring of ice harvester, rigs rolled on hidden gimbals to align projectors older than some of their crews. Around Saturn, maintenance beacons articulated into triangles and began to sing to one another. Xerx tried to jump. FTL drives coughed and died like engines trying to start underwater. He tried to run sublight. Gravity took on opinions. Courses bent toward empty volumes that refused to stay empty. He did the one wise thing left: stop improvising. All units form on primary flags. We will batter straight through their line and trust mass. On Republic, Monroe watched 3 Concorde formations lock shields and punch. "There it is," he said. "When doctrine fails, organisms reach for muscle memory." He also knew what the belt had been built to do to muscle memory. Channel 17, open. His face appeared on hostile bridges a second later. "Turn away. We will not strike life support if you turn away. This offer will not repeat." 2 captains took the off-ramp. The third didn't. Shepherd asteroid slid on rails no one else could see. The corridor narrowed into an equation that would accept only one answer. The rocks gave it for him. The blast washed the plot white. "Ceramic losses," Naomi asked quietly. She meant, did our kinetic foundries just spend months of human hands in one bright second? "Reserves with intolerance," said Ops. Naomi forced herself to remember the names behind each reserve. There is no such thing as an impersonal weapon system. There are only people concealed by scale. Sable Net did not simply forbid escape. It herded. Concorde ships found themselves, suggested, into volumes where weapons misbehaved and sensors told fairy tales. The human fleet did not crowd them. Wolves don't crowd a cornered animal. They watched for flares of desperation and took away options until calm became the only rational choice. Xerx refused calm. He gathered heavy hulls and aimed at the faintest point in the net, out by Pluto, where humanity's attention had always seemed thin. It was not. The dwarf's night side flickered. An observatory blinked away like a house removing its mask. A hexagon of pylons unfurled and whispered to Sable. The jump-stilling deepened. "Admiral," said his comms officer, "the enemy is transmitting on all channels." Ray's voice, patient as a teacher. "You trained for victory by spectacle. We trained for endurance by concealment. We would rather win a century by never firing than a minute by firing first. That said, we are prepared to finish this minute if you insist." Naomi muted the speech and opened a line to medical. "Triage status." "Green across our hulls," came the reply. "Concorde casualties. Unknown." "Start wideband med casts," Naomi said. "Basic trauma protocols in their lingua where we have it. If you want a durable peace, begin by treating the wounds you didn't inflict." When a senator once called it sentimental, she showed him a graph. Populations that grow up with enemy field dressings in their museums make fewer insurgents. On Veldrian Prime, the Concorde Council watched splinters of their fleet die on sterile displays. The Mist Lattice envoy that had laughed before was silent. Lord Archivist Rue played an old recording. The last time his species mocked a backwater tribe, their cities burned for a century. "We learned once," he said. "We can learn again." Back near Saturn, Youth's Mercy, a hospital ship painted the soft blue of promises, eased into a pocket of the battle space under a flag older than flight. Mercy carried no offensive fields. It carried translators, water, warm hands. Reyes had insisted on deploying it. "Let them see what we prioritize under fire." Jiang, the chief surgeon, accepted. "We carry our oath where it's hardest." They did not shoot at it. A glass-borne frigate, weaponless after a reality shear, neutered its spine, blinked running lights in a code older than any treaty. "We cannot fight. We can drown." Mercy came alongside with the practiced arrogance of a rescue boat. Humans in vacuum-rated orange crossed into a corridor that smelled like hot salt and fear. "You are prisoners of war," Jiang said, very gently. "You are also patients." Thierks received that report like a blow. "They board with medics," his XO whispered. Thierks stared at his knuckles and found, to his disgust, that admiration was back. "They are dangerous in ways we did not train for," he said. "They will try to recruit our shame." Shame was already sitting in every chair. Reyes thought about what came after slaughter. Any victory that requires lying to your own dead will not hold. The plot showed a final knot of Concorde ships clawing at a thin place in sable net. He did not blame them. He gave the order that would make the next phase possible. "Trigger waypoints," he said. "If any get through, they still don't get out." On the edge of the map, a dozen abandoned telescopes in nearby systems woke like watchmen hearing the end of a story and knowing there would be an epilogue. Operation Waypoint had always been the quietest line in Janus. A frontier is not a wall but a weave. You do not guard only your yard. You guard the routes away from it. 6 hours after SableNet cinched tight, the first fugitives reached the exits they thought were theirs. In Proxima's dim red wash, 3 Concorde cruisers tumbled out of jump like drunks rushing a door. The door had a lock they could not see. Youth's hunter had waited 15 years inside an ice cave with a view of sunrise once every 7 Earth days. Captain Elena Ortiz woke from stasis and let the ache remind her what patience cost. "Waypoint 1 green," she said. "Launch dust." The drones were smaller than gnats and smarter than most nav officers. They slipped through hull seams, read the language of heat, and began flipping breakers like polite burglars. The cruiser's lights dimmed and steadied, then dimmed again into the gray that means a ship has chosen to live. Ortiz spoke on open band. "This is Captain Ortiz of Terran Defense. Power down. Jettison weapons. You will be treated under the conventions. Resist and you will be treated under physics." After a long pause, magnetic clamps thudded. A minute later, weapon pods spun loose and drifted. Ross 128 was where the plan almost failed. Commander Liu Y ran his outpost from inside a rock that had once been a miner's dream and was now a soldier's. He had studied the Concorde's doctrine until he could think like their admirals. He had not predicted that one of them would abandon doctrine entirely. A lone heavy cruiser jumped blind without scouts and dove for the gravity well he controlled. He could crush it. He did not. He turned the dial until the ship slowed to a stumble and held it there with painful precision. "Board?" asked his second. "We are not here to make more ghosts," Liu said. "We are here to remove occasions for haunting." He sent a boarding skiff with a searchlight any old Coast Guard coxswain would recognize. When the hatch opened, the glass-born captain inside looked at him with the flat eyes of a person who has used up all his choices. "Prison," the captain said in bad trade. "But not," he gestured and could not find the word. "Not spectacle," Liu supplied. The captain nodded once and passed over his sidearm like a confession. Back in Saul, Therx watched his plots darken as unit tags winked out not just from death but from capture. It was not the same as defeat. It was worse. Death could be written as sacrifice and used to purchase a story. Captivity could not. He looked around the bridge of his flagship and saw professionals doing their work with fewer and fewer options. He admired them. He despised the position he had put them in. "Signal surrender terms," he said at last, and the words tasted like iron. The reply came from Naomi Park. Reyes had insisted she take that call. Some messages must be spoken by the person who believes them. "Admiral Therx," she said, "we will accept surrender without humiliation. You will maintain command of your crews until transfer. Your dead will be identified and returned with honors. Your wounded will be treated by our doctors. We will record depositions without staging theater." Therx closed his eyes, and after, Naomi said, "We will talk about what it means to build a border without building a prison. If that sounds naive, I understand. I have designed both kinds on paper. One rots its builders, the other educates them." He thought of the memory choir's stories. He thought of the difference between a leash and a handrail. "Transmit coordinates," he said. "We will come in." A murmur ran the bridge, not of despair but of relief. People can carry shame for a long time. They do better when someone points to a door marked daylight. On Mercy, Dr. Jiang scrubbed at a sink that had seen more alien blood in one day than any textbook pictured. Her intern asked the question med students always ask in wars that are almost won. "Why them, if they came to kill us?" Jiang rinsed her hands and thought of combat medics in black and white helmets. "Because that's the point," she said. "We're trying to become the kind of species that doesn't answer every injury with another. If we fail here, our victory will fail later." Nearby, a boy from a cargo deck handed a thirsty glass-born mechanic a squeeze bottle and learned that the word for thank you in that language is a click like snapping chalk. Later, the boy would teach it to his little sister, and she would click it at the cat. And nothing in doctrine had prepared anyone for how good that small joke would feel. These things also matter, Naomi thought as she read the debriefs. Strategy builds rooms. Culture decides if anyone wants to live in them. By the time the Waypoint net finished eating the last desperate jumps, the Concorde's invasion looked like a ledger instead of a battle. Manifests of prisoners, repair queues, rotations for interpreters and cooks. Reyes disliked the word clean up. It implied trash instead of people. He walked the length of Republic and asked crew chiefs what they needed. Most asked for sleep. One asked for a chaplain. He sent 3. Naomi made the last decision of the day. She asked Mercy's choir to sing a set of human songs on a channel the Concorde could hear. Voices braided through static until they found a melody simple enough to survive translation. It was about going home. Some of the Concorde cried where no one could see. Some of the humans did too. Reyes listened, hands folded, and allowed himself to imagine the politics to come. Councils, stubborn men, frightened ones, a treaty that would either hold or fracture. 6 months later, though that belongs to the next act, the harmony would descend on Veldrian Prime not as a sword but as a lantern. For now, the lantern was an idea traveling by rumor. They didn't breach Earth's frontiers, the rumor said. They hit a wall and found a gatekeeper who wanted to talk. It rode the only engine that never runs out of fuel. A story with enough humility to be believed and enough audacity to be remembered. 6 months after the last Concorde distress signal had died into the static between stars, the harmony came out of fold space above Veldrian Prime like a lantern carried into a cavern. Its hull was not painted for intimidation but for memory. Reliefs of open hands and constellations, tessellations taken from Navajo blankets and Polynesian wayfinding, a ring of scripts, Arabic, Cyrillic, Devanagari, Latin spelling out a promise older than rockets. We came to talk. Beneath the soft show of light, the ship wore armor that had watched planets suffer and swore to prevent repeats. Sarah Chen stood at the forward viewport and let the city's crystal towers fill her eyes. "We're guests," she reminded her staff. "Behave like the future depends on that. It does." Docking Control, which had once launched a fleet to reduce Earth to obedient ash, cleared them to a diplomatic berth with the briskness of a hospital admitting a surprise birth. Protocol officers blinked at hull projectors tuned to make children laugh, at gun ports that had been refitted to throw murals across air. They had expected a sermon, not a festival. On the berth, Lord Chancellor Vexara waited with a delegation arranged like a cautionary tale about pride. Beside her stood Admiral Therx, lighter by a command and heavier by a conscience. "Ambassador Chen," Vexara said, voice like glass under rain. "On behalf of the former Concorde, we recognize your diplomatic mission." The words "former" and "recognize" cost her something. Sarah bowed as if she had watched the coin being paid and would not make it hurt more than it had to. They went to the chamber with the ring of cold light. The table remembered war plans and spitefully kept its shine. Sarah put her palms flat on it, a gesture as old as bargaining. "You plan to breach our frontier. We turned the frontier into a weave and caught your plan. Both acts reveal character. I am not here to humiliate you. I am here to propose we build something that neither of us can build alone." Skepticism spilled like water on a tilted surface. The machine confederacy delegate ticked through probabilities. A Scorian hissed about slavery by a nicer name. Therx listened and said, when the room was done airing heat, "I have fought prey. Humans are not prey. They are neighbors who brought fire and a bucket. I advise we hear the rest." Sarah did not open with weapons, she opened with limits. Every technology we fielded has a cost curve, a failure mode, a moral fence. She told them about the night Sable Net snapped a freighter in two because an engineer's child had a fever and the checklist missed a line. The way their doctrine changed the next morning to include double signatures and triple redundancies. She spoke about Mercy's triage and about the medcasts broadcast in borrowed tongues across battle space. "Power without self-limitation is simply appetite with better tools," she said. "We intend to keep the tools and remove the appetite." Vexara asked the question any prudent politician asks a victorious power. "Why not rule?" "Because it doesn't work," Sarah said. "Empires are efficient at moving stone and terrible at moving consent. Rome paved the world and then tripped on its own roads. The United States learned once that reconstruction done for vengeance breeds insurgency. The Marshall Plan taught a different arithmetic. Generosity that protects interests is not hypocrisy, it's adulthood. We want to act like adults." She drew in the air a different kind of map, one that did not put Saul at the center out of vanity but because the math of logistics said so. "The Terran Federation," she said. Voluntary, plural, bound by mutual defense. No tribute. Technology shared according to a charter. Disputes arbitrated by a council weighted for population and contribution, with a minority veto on existential matters. Entrance exam. Can you treat your dissidents as citizens? If not, we will help you learn. If you refuse to learn, you may remain outside, and outside comes with fences you do not like. They expected threats. She offered duties. She detailed a defense commons where sable-grade shields would be licensed to signatories under strict interoperability rules, seated with inspectors empowered to yank keys at the first sign of predation. She showed drafts of a research trust that required cross-species teams for grants above a threshold, to build habits of humility into laboratories. She proposed a hospitality law. Ships in distress, rescued without regard to flag, enforced by compulsion fields no one could ignore. She did not hide that the harmony could turn those fields cruel. Think of it as a seat belt, she said, annoying until you crash. In the third hour, a minor delegate from the crystal hegemony, Envoy Yik, rose and in careful trade accused the humans of sanctimony. You speak of restraint, Yik said, but you can change the laws of physics around my ship. Is that not the height of arrogance? Changing constants is mechanical, Sarah said, refusing to deploy that change because the corridor you're in has civilians on the far side. That's culture. We are here to build culture. It includes you. A bomb would have been easier. In the fourth hour, an easier thing arrived, a leak. A faction within the Concorde had smuggled a device into a power spine under the chamber. Old thinking dies loud. The Harmony's sensors caught the shift in neutrinos like a sigh. Sarah did not shout. You have a problem below your feet, she said. We will fix it if you ask. Asking was an admission. Vexara closed her eyes and nodded. The Harmony went to work. Reality anchors arrested the reaction by making a cubic meter of the spine forget how to chain. Engineers in orange and translators with soft hands and sharp ears slid into passages and spoke to terrified maintenance crews. Derek stood at a junction with a pistol he had once used to start wars, and now used to guard women hauling cable passed to them by a Scorian boy who would have tried to bite him a year ago. When it was over, the chamber smelled like ozone and breath. No one died. Someone laughed the breathless laugh of a person whose name will now continue. It was a small thing, it was everything. Sarah turned off her projector. That, she said, is our proposition indeed. We won't let you blow yourselves up in our hearing. We won't let others do it to you. We will not tolerate you doing it to anyone else. Join and you will have to live with that nagging neighbor forever. Decline and you will still live next to us and be nagged. Choose the version with better food. Derek surprised himself by smiling. Vexara surprised herself by asking to see the charter draft again, not as a formality but like a tailor fingering cloth. Outside, the Harmonies hull through an animation of children in 3 gravities teaching each other how to fall safely. Dockworkers looked up and let politics wait for half a minute while they learned. The charter negotiations began with a word that translators could not agree on: sovereignty. To some species, it meant the right to keep outsiders off your porch. To others, it meant the duty to offer tea to any stranger who reached your door without a weapon. Sarah assembled a team of philosophers, historians, and mechanics, people who knew how to argue, remember, and build. We will write something that survives boredom, she told them. War forges fast, peace rusts. Our sentences must be rust-proof. They drafted by example. Article 1 named the thing no war planner ever puts first: rescue. All signatories obligated to answer distress beacons with best available capacity, to accept inspection of best available capacity claims, and to tolerate temporary commandeering of civilian vessels when the ocean is on fire. The Glassborn protested. Their legends warned against letting guests see your larder. Sarah told the story of Dunkirk and borrowed boats. Therks told the story of the night of falling bridges when Fisher Craft saved a city his people now called stubborn. The sentence survived. Article 2 bound defense. Sable-class inhibitors would be seated at major ports under dual-key control, one key held by local authorities, the other by a rotating inspectorate drawn by lot and oath. "We will not build another Concorde," Sarah said. "We'll build a neighborhood watch with ethics training and good locks." The Machine Confederacy delegate proposed a delay mechanism. If one key turned, the other had 12 minutes to object and trigger review. 12 minutes is forever during a raid. It is also the difference between a trap and a safety. The sentence survived, but the margin notes included an essay on patience. Article 3 created the Research Trust. "No grant above a threshold without cross-species teams," Sarah said, "and no publication without a plain-language ethical statement 2 pages or fewer." A Scorian agronomist, prideful and honest, said what many thought: "You cannot legislate conscience. You can scaffold it." Naomi answered over the link from Geneva. "And you can require people to explain themselves as a condition of receiving everyone's money. Explanations improve both science and shame." The sentence survived and acquired an addendum. Any research that changes constants must be tested in uninhabited volumes at specified distances, because a drift net has a shameful history as an ocean killer. Article 4 was the quarrel. Admission criteria. Vexara demanded that cultures with ritual subjugation reform first, join later. Sarah said joining can be the reform. The U.S. let states that hated each other share a table until they learned to call each other by names that were not insults. Slowness is their sin and their salvation. Therks, who had watched species burn because they were not allowed to enter a club except as servants, sided with Sarah. The sentence survived with a compromise. Provisional membership existed. It came with tutoring and auditors rude enough to be useful. While drafts grew teeth, the room grew fragile. A human senator on Sarah's team posted a speech to a domestic feed calling for justice that bites. A Concorde firebrand splashed it across Veldrian's walls as proof that humans hid fangs behind smiles. The Harmony's media bay did not spin. It invited the senator to explain himself under lights tuned to make lies itch. He did. "I think anger is honest," he said. "I also think law is how we cool anger without denying its cause." He quoted Lincoln again. "Too often, perhaps, but you repeat the good hymns because some rooms need the refrain." A human fringe group tried to blow up the negotiation by leaking a catalog of Concorde atrocities to a public channel with grainy footage and lurid captions. The catalog was accurate. Sarah broadcast it herself, unedited. She paired it with footage of Mercy's triage and of human soldiers hauling wounded Glassborn under fire. "We can hold 2 truths," she said on every screen. "What you did and what we chose." Then she offered something more dangerous than censure: amnesty contingent on testimony. "Tell us how you built the machines that hurt us," she said to perpetrators who thought they were safe in anonymity. "Then help us write the interlocks that keep others from rebuilding them. You will live, You will work. Your grandchildren will not wear your shame if you refuse to hand it down. Half refused, a quarter fled, a surprising number chose the work. Law eats easy cases, culture must digest the rest. The hardest day began with silence. A Scorian city called Vec-Cor sent no morning traffic. Its sky went gray like old teeth. Sensors caught a pulse, then another. A faction of Concord Revanchists had seized a discreet stockpile of field modulators and turned a neighborhood into a demonstration. If you surrender your sovereignty, your children will learn foreign hymns at gunpoint. The transmission showed a school. It showed little bodies arranged like punctuation. The harmony left orbit without waiting for votes. Sarah warned as she went. You cannot invite us and forbid us to act when invited becomes endangered, she told Vexara. If you want us to leave afterward, we will. The ship fell into Vec-Cor's sky like a syllable that doesn't belong and became the grammar of survival. Reality anchors rippled, turning weapons into embarrassed sculptures. The ground under the school learned to love friction. The air learned to misbehave for anything carrying enough heat to scar a child. Verx landed a squad. He did not bring Marines. He brought engineers and medics and translators and a priest whose job was to listen. They found a boy with a burn on his cheek where a zealot's gun had kissed him. The priest asked if he wanted to hate. The boy, who had just watched strangers throw light between him and a bullet, said, "I want to learn what that light is called." The priest told him it had 1,000 names and one root, neighbor. After, in the chamber, Sarah ceded part of the dais to a Scorian mother who had stood under the harmony's shadow. Sovereignty, the mother said into the translators, means I get to raise my child without fear that my neighbor's war will cross my threshold. Today, it meant humans stood in my yard and did not tell me what to cook. They took away a gun and left me with my kitchen. I can live with that. Article 5 wrote itself. Intervention triggers and sunset clauses. No permanent garrisons without consent renewed annually by local assemblies. No action except to stop active harm or enforce previous sentences. Every intervention accompanied by repairs and a public audit. The sentence survived. Rust-proof. No sentences, but some resist weather longer. The day they finished the first readable draft, Sarah took her team to the Harmony's forward gallery and let them look at the purple sun. "We're not done," she said. "We're not even right. We've just made it harder to be wrong without noticing." That, she thought, was as much as law could promise without lying. The first test of the draft was not a vote but a siege that called itself a patrol. General Carrot, who had lost 2 sons in the belt and one, in a sudden understanding of human competence, commandeered a patrol group and set course for a corridor where the sable filaments were young. He told his staff he would test the seat belt with a scalpel and show the Concorde that the new charter was a cage. He told himself that grief justified experiments. The Harmony took a line of fold gates and arrived before the rumor did. Sarah stood with Verx at a shared console. "I won't ask you to order your ships to back down," she said. "I will ask you to talk first." Verx nodded. "I spent a career saying fire. I can bear the novelty of listen." He took the channel. "General Carrot, this is Verx, formerly of Fleet Command. You are about to test a door by running into it with your head. I advise a hand." Carrot's face, ridged by duty and the cheap sculpting of grief, filled the screen. "We kneel to no human," he said. "Your lights do not impress me." Sarah did not answer insult with counter-insult. "Grief makes honest arguments," she said. It also makes bad plans. We've built something that will not let your plan hurt anyone except your pride. She brought up a schematic in his language and showed him exactly how the inhibitors around his vector would coil if he insisted. "We will not kill you to stop you," she said. "We will embarrass you. If that is worse than death, turn now and keep your dignity. If you continue, we will broadcast your embarrassment to your grandchildren for training purposes. They will forgive you faster if you make it short." He accelerated. The inhibitors woke like seawalls remembering a storm. His lead ship's FTL coughed into silence. Sublight felt like swimming in thick oil. He fired a spread of missiles to test the patience of physics and found patience abundant. The Harmony did not answer with teeth. It answered with a net of micro-anchors that made launcher doors heavy and guidance uncertain. Missiles fell out of the sky like birds deciding they were rocks. Karit tried rhetoric next. "Observe the humans stifling freedom," he broadcast. "Observe them refusing us the right to move. Observe me walking to a market." A Scorian vendor replied on the open band, camera dancing as she pushed a cart. "Observe my child not being on fire. Observe me voting yes to that." She had spent the morning under the Harmony's shadow in Vec Core. No theory could separate her from it. Karit's second son had drawn spaceships in a careful hand. The general still kept one of those pages under his sleeve, tight as a bandage. He stared at the Harmony's plot and recognized, finally, that another line had been drawn under his life. The place where a good soldier stops being useful and starts being a symptom. He cut thrust. "If I turn now," he said on tight band, "do you arrest me?" Therx answered as a friend who had once been a rival. "If you turn and deliver your command codes to civilian oversight within the hour, I will testify that you return to the law faster than anyone had a right to expect. If you run, Sarah will catch you without killing you and show the video to your grandchildren." "She will," Sarah said, "because making empty threats is the enemy of law." He turned. He delivered the codes. He resigned under words that tasted like ash and kept his dignity. Harmony took no victory lap. It pushed updates to the inhibitor's doctrine, escalation ladders, public logging of interventions, a default to third-party arbiters. Sarah had studied Madison. Ambition must be made to counteract ambition. In space, fields must check fields. In law, pride must be given levers that don't require guns to move. They wrote a clause that made it possible for any captain, Concord or human, to challenge an inhibitor activation and force a review by a jury of captains drawn at random from signatories. The jury's decision would be binding for 30 days, after which oversight could amend doctrine again. Law as code, code as law. On Veldrian Prime, a referendum of sorts unfolded. City squares filled with screens and translators. A chorus of citizen assemblies spoke in different cadences and resolved, again and again, to adopt, to amend, to watch. The most persuasive speeches were not about admiration for human arms, but about relief from living under suspicion. A glass-born poet said, "I would rather have laws that embarrass me than commanders who do." A mist-lattice elder whispered, "Frontiers should be lungs, not walls." Mercy toward the worlds that had been taught to hate her and left behind clinics and songs. In one harbor, kids learned a lullaby in 3 scales. In another, the lullaby learned the kids. Soldiers learned to stand by without entertaining. For once, the itch to dominate. Civilians learned that Marines could stack sandbags without selecting targets. Medical students learned that triage begins before the blast. The hardest persuasion was at home. Earth's feeds stuffed themselves with arguments. We bled, we built, and now we give. One pundit raged. Rays, who disliked shows, went on one. He brought Naomi, and a union welder from Delphi Yard, whose hands looked like the blueprints they had made, and a nurse from Mercy, whose hands looked like sleep given to strangers, and a teacher whose students had sent questions to alien kids and received answers in exchanges of clumsy drawings. We do not give, the welder said. We invest. My granddaughter will live in a galaxy where her tools are useful because her neighbors are not on fire. The ratings spiked, then slipped, then settled. Democracies do not accept virtue until it starts paying dividends you can spend at a gas station. The price of Xenon shouldered the argument better than any speech. The charter signing date approached with the nervousness of a first day of school. Outside the Harmony, scaffolds held flags designed in the last month by artists who learned, under deadline, how to draw together. The Machine Confederacy asked for a subclause about computational sovereignty. The Scorian unions demanded protections for agricultural commons. The Glassborn insisted that prisoners of war be guaranteed letters from home. Sarah agreed to all three. Rust-proofing, she thought again, is not a coding. It's a habit of maintenance. She went to sleep the night before the ceremony with her shoes on. Sable taught her to expect tests at dawn. The dawn test came not as sabotage but as thunder. A crystalline monitor ring above Veldrian Prime flickered and went dark. Traffic shifted, hesitated, then repeated a maneuver the Concorde had practiced for centuries when systems hiccuped. Switch to manual and trust the pros. Pros swore and did. The ring cascaded failure to a maintenance ladder that nobody had climbed in a decade except to paint it. Someone had buried a worm in a supervisory node long before the last battle, a sleeping instruction to make a morning feel like a verdict. The Harmony woke, and 1,000 quiet machines held their breath, waiting for orders. Sarah gave them none. We fix. We don't flex, she said. Engineers in orange went up ladders. The ship projected a traffic pattern across the sky that made a ballet out of fear and kept kids pointing up instead of down. Dr. Jiang went to the ring with a tool she had learned as a resident, a roll of tape and a marker for labeling chaos. Naomi, patched in from Geneva, walked an exhausted tech through a reboot that required 2 hands and 1 lullaby to stay steady. The ring came back segment by segment. The sky unclenched. They traced the worm to a garden that had not been watered since the last election. A man who had once sold surveillance equipment now sold slogans. He had not planted the worm. He had merely hired someone not to look for it. He told a camera without shame that this proved the charter naive. Humans make mistakes, Sarah said on the same channel, and so do you. The difference is in how we repair. She turned the embarrassment into a lesson and wrote a clause about supervisory redundancy with notes for teachers who would use it in civics classes. The ceremony moved to an indoor hall with honest acoustics. Banners hung like fresh laundry. The dais held chairs made at a speed that made craftsmen wince and mothers shrug. Sarah looked at the faces and saw fatigue, suspicion, a kind of hope that dared not speak loudly because it was new here. She remembered a line her grandfather had said at a backyard table after a long strike ended with less than victory. We got enough to keep working. She opened the charter to the first signature page and waited for someone else to move first. Vexara stood. I was built to manage victory, she said, and found myself curating a loss. This charter gives me a job worth the verb. She signed. The machine confederacy's delegates signed by creating a line of code that bound them publicly. A vulnerability report disclosed on a schedule that apologized for old secrecy. Xerxes signed and then stepped aside, and when reporters asked if he felt humiliated, he said, "Humiliation is thinking you were an apex when you were a cliff. Today, I am happy to be a handrail." The harmony signaled the outer systems. At Barnard, the hunter played a recording of a school in Vec Core reciting Article 1 in messy chorus. At Ross 128, Liu Y took down a "no visitors" sign he had kept as a joke. At Alpha Centauri, a ship that had never admitted its presence lit its running lamps for the first time in 15 years, and was surprised when the local fishermen cheered. Mercy launched a clinic ship crewed half by glassborn, half by humans. The clinic sailed to a world where a drought had found purchase in old neglect. It rained within a month because irrigation is more obedient than climate when enough hands dig ditches. On Earth, a child asked in class whether aliens had holidays. The teacher sent the question through the harmony. A week later, Veldrian Prime declared a new one, Lantern Day, commemorating the morning strangers fixed a ring before breakfast. Humans did not insist on being named. They had learned that anonymous goodness buys more than statues. Still, a statue appeared in a corner of the dock, a worker in orange passing a wrench to a glassborn in blue. It was ugly, it was perfect. Resistance did not end. A talk show taught fear by recipe. A pamphlet insisted that technology shared is technology stolen. A demonstration outside a shipyard offered the old chant in a new meter, "Feed us before you feed the sky." Reyes did not sneer. He went to the line and promised better rations in the yard contract, and got them because law allows bargaining as a path to grace. The welder who had spoken on TV invited the picket captains to a memorial for the Belt dead. They came. The names read included Concord and Human, separate columns under one arch. Grief did not suddenly become brotherhood. It became less lonely. Sarah traveled not as a conqueror but as a repairman. In a hall of the Machine Confederacy, she listened to a treatise about computational dignity and agreed that humans must not become overconfident users of minds they did not build. In a Scorian farm, she planted a row of seedlings that had learned to imitate desert fog and drip it into roots. In a Glassborn academy, she lectured on interstate commerce clauses and why corridors have always needed rules. She carried in her coat pocket a chip that held the charter's latest revision and a photograph of her grandparents at a counter where they had not been served until they refused to leave. She took that photo out only when someone accused her of having faith unearned by struggle. At the year's end, the Federation, tentative, toothy, tender, had 29 members, 8 provisional, 3 hostile, and dozens undecided. The sable net sang less often. Waypoints woke to guide freighters instead of fugitives. The Harmony, as promised, refitted one of its weapons conduits into a theater where immigrants taught each other curse words with solemnity and joy. Mercy launched a program to certify medics in 5 species anatomies. Naomi's array listened to a dark that was quieter now and subtler in its threats, and for the first time since she had taken the night shift, she slept 3 hours without dreaming in alarms. One evening above Veldrian Prime, Sarah stood alone at the viewport. The spires glowed with the ordinary gold of windows at dinner time. In the starfield beyond, sable filaments looked like frost on glass. She thought of frontiers as Americans had used the word promise and theft braided, and of how a better century would require untangling. "We will make mistakes," she told the window. "We will fix them. We will carry our tools in public." On the dock, a child asked a question that every charter someday must earn. "Are we safe?" His mother answered, "Safer," which is the only honest comparative in a universe with entropy and people. The harmony pulsed a soft light across the berth. Steady, steady, steady. Beneath it, engineers argued over a clause. Poets rewrote the preamble so it would sing. A priest and an atheist haggled over commas. A welder clocked out and took her granddaughter for ice cream under a sky made temporarily sensible by cables, treaties, and the stubborn decision to be neighbors. If you pressed an ear to the hull, you could hear it. The hum of a civilization not at peace but at work. That is the sound that keeps ships flying and children asking impertinent, beautiful questions. That is the sound of a frontier that learned to be a gate instead of a wound.